Well, with just 47 days left until Election Day, both presidential campaigns are focusing on the key battleground states they need to win the White House. Reporter Heather Sells has this look at which states the candidates are targeting.
Barack Obama's campaign once talked optimistically about a full-on 50-state strategy, but no more. What caused the change? Momentum, courtesy of Sarah Palin, and now national polls show John McCain picking up speed. Bush campaign architect Karl Rove says if those polls equaled electoral votes, McCain would have 227 to Obama's 226. That's a shift of more than 30 votes just since the Democratic convention.
We have a very volatile electorate. We have a bunch of people who like both of these candidates. They have strong positives and relatively low negatives for this point in a presidential campaign, and they're weakly linked to their choice. And so things like the choice of Sarah Palin or an international incident or something else, the performance in the debate, all of these things will have a big impact on the vote.
Looking closer at the electoral map, we find 85 toss-up votes in many of the same battleground states as the last two presidential elections. The four biggies for 2008, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Florida. Obama's stops along the Rust Belt straight out of Denver signaled the importance of this region. The Illinois senator is also hoping to pick off some western states, namely Colorado, New Mexico, and Nevada. Virginia is another shifting state that holds potential. McCain's priority will be holding on to Florida and Ohio. Bush won the Sunshine State in 2004, and Ohio looks competitive. One reason, Palin's popularity in the rural areas where Obama was weak in the primaries. The Palin factor has also helped to solidify many red-blue divisions of recent years. But analysts caution anything is possible between now and November.
Well, thanks, Heather. With us now for a closer look at the upcoming election is Wall Street Journal columnist John Fund. His latest book is called Stealing Elections. And John, it's a pleasure to welcome you back to the 700 Club. How close is this race right now?
The average of all of the polls we have show a dead-even race. I think we're going to head into the debates with both candidates evenly matched. Those debates will be very important. I predict, though, the election is going to be so close, there is a very good chance, Pat, we're going to go into overtime, where Election Day once again becomes election month, like it did in Florida in 2000, but probably in a different set of states. And there'll be recounts, recriminations, and rabid lawyers trying to drag this election into court.
You've indicated the Democrats have already engaged 10,000 lawyers to go across the country in relation to, what, vote fraud or challenges to vote?
Well, what they're trying to do is extend polling hours on Election Day, if there's any pretext to do that. That was done in St. Louis in 2000. They're trying to have provisional votes, which are cast in one precinct, counted in another precinct, even if the voter doesn't live there. And there's a whole range of lawsuits that are being planned. The Republicans have their own set of lawyers filing potential lawsuits. What I'm simply saying is our democracy is at risk if we take the decision away from the voters and drag it into court. It didn't help George W. Bush's legitimacy in 2000 to have that Florida mess. I don't think it would help now. Pat, this is the first election in American history where any voter who goes into a polling place and says, I want to vote, but their name isn't on the registration list, is handed a provisional ballot. That ballot is counted only if it's valid later. But here's the problem. Let's say the election is so close it depends on Michigan, and McCain is ahead by 21,000 votes. But there are 90,000 provisional votes that could be valid or might not be valid. There's going to be a lot of lawsuits as to whether or not those 90,000 votes are counted and to who those votes go to.
You've written about a group called ACORN, which I understand is funded in part by George Soros. Tell me about ACORN.
Well, ACORN is born out of the radical community organizer Saul Alinsky, and it was founded in 1970. They basically engage in welfare rights demonstrations, demonstrations for more public housing, but they also do a lot of voter registration efforts, primarily in Democratic areas. They have a political arm, which endorsed Barack Obama the day that he was announcing for president. They have a non-political arm, supposedly, which registers voters. And I think that they've been suspect around the country. They've had people indicted and convicted in Washington State, in Kansas City, in St. Louis, All over the country, there have been problems with ACORN registrations, just this week in Michigan. The reason this is important is Barack Obama was a former trainer for ACORN, and he was their lawyer for several years. So ACORN and Obama are very closely linked. Obama has never criticized ACORN's methods, and I fear that ACORN is going to be injected into this election in a way that will cause the results to be into doubt, that they engage in something that's very akin to voter fraud, and that we have a problem here. Because if the election is viewed as not legitimate, I think we could be heading towards a crisis of confidence in the results.
John, how does the ordinary citizen stop ACORN? Do organizations like this, if indeed they're engaged in what looks like fraudulent voting, how can you stop that? How can, say, the Republicans or somebody head it off?
Well, I think there are three things that can be done. I think prosecutors have to alert people before elections that they're paying attention to this. We don't want any voter suppression or intimidation, but we also want voters to cast a ballot and not have it canceled out by someone who shouldn't be voting, someone who doesn't exist, or someone who's voting twice. That's a civil right too. And I think if prosecutors indicate that they're paying attention to this, that will help. I also think we need more poll watchers, and we need more people to volunteer to help out the election officials at the polls and to make sure that there's no chicanery. And I also think that simply media scrutiny of this, ACORN is getting a lot more attention this year than it did 4 years ago, and I think that that will clean up their act a little bit.
Last question. There's been some discussion about the candidates for state senate when Obama was running. What happened in that election?
Well, Barack Obama is allied with the Chicago Daily machine. Sarah Palin in Alaska challenged her Republican machine and kicked out an incumbent governor. Barack Obama has accommodated himself the Daily machine. He's never really directly criticized them. And his strategist, David Axelrod, is also Mayor Daley's strategist. So in 1996, when Barack Obama first ran for office, he used allies of Mayor Daley to challenge his opponent's legitimacy to be on the ballot. He said their signatures were collected improperly, a form of vote fraud. And he threw every single one of his opponents off the ballot, Pat. He ran unopposed his first election. So here we have Barack Obama accusing his opponents in his first election of vote fraud, but now he is allying himself with ACORN, which has engaged in all kinds of suspect activities. So on the one hand, he says there is no vote fraud out there, we don't have to worry about it, but that's precisely how he first got into public office, by challenging people he claimed had committed vote fraud.
Why doesn't the mainstream press that is so hard on Sarah Palin, why don't they get onto this? This is a major story.
Well, it's astonishing because the Chicago Daily machine is infamous. As you know, in 1960, John F. Kennedy probably won Illinois over Richard Nixon through vote fraud. And there's a long tradition of the Daily machine doing whatever it takes to win. And I think that Barack Obama, by accommodating himself with the Daily machine, has cast into question his reputation as a reformer. Name me the times when he's gone up against the Daily machine. Name me the times when he's challenged the leadership of his party. As we know right now, the governor of his state, Rod Blagojevich, is under federal investigation. I haven't heard Barack Obama speak out against Governor Blagojevich's ethical transgressions. It's astonishing that Sarah Palin is getting this amount of scrutiny, and Barack Obama's Chicago record has basically been given a pass.
John Fund, is your book available in bookstores? Where can they get it?
They can get it in bookstores, and they can also get it at Amazon.com. It's called Stealing Elections, How Voter Fraud Threatens Our Democracy, and it's very relevant if we want to avoid a Florida-style meltdown this fall.
Thank you. John Fund, isn't that amazing?
That is amazing, and it's scary.
Of course it's scary.
Absolutely.
Stealing our elections, stealing our democratic processes, and organizations like ACORN that have just got loads of money. And as I say, I think Soros is putting some into it, but it's voter fraud. Folks, we don't need this. We need clean elections. Everybody needs to think when they cast a vote, that vote is going to count, and that it's going to be counted fairly, and that whoever the winner is, I mean, you know, he's won fair and square, and it isn't something that's being taken over by the courts. That would be a dreadful thing to go into months and months and months of not knowing who the next president is.
We don't want to go back to the year 2000.
No
we don't want to
no